reasoning did you apply to those theologies, and have you applied them to your own beliefs?
What reasoning did I apply in dismissing the other theologies? Well, what's interesting, this is a little side thing. This idea that like there are multiple truths, which is a common idea. I mean, like I said, I grew up Unitarian Universalist. I was taught this from a little kid. That in itself is telling all those religions that they're wrong also. Because Muslims don't believe that they're one of many truths. Buddhists don't believe that they're one of many truths. Like the Unitarian Universalist is also doing the same thing that we accuse all the other religions of doing, of claiming to be the true keepers of the actual truth.
Say, if this is some God, how do I identify which one?
So if someone else who has an experience like that?
Let's say somebody else has an experience of God. How do they determine which God?
Well, I mean, in my case, I shared part of the story. I should probably finish it. In my case, I had this terrible clarity that I was evil. That's why I said it before. I had this experience where I knew it thought as clear as 1 and 1 equals 2, a holy God and myself equals judgment. I understood that it was good for God to judge me. And that sounds crazy, being outside of that, but I understood that I deserved judgment, and I saw myself. Okay, let me put it this way. This way I explain it a lot, actually. If you've ever been a child or perhaps an adult who's got caught in the act of doing something you're not supposed to do, and you're anything like me, your mind's going really quick. You're like, I'm going to think my way out of this. What do I say? What do I say? And it wasn't like that, because I was naked before him. There was no talking my way out of this. So as much as I was terrified, my mind also became very quiet, because it was just surrender. It was like, it's very clear what's going on here. It's very clear that I have nothing to say in my defense. It's very clear that I deserve the judgment of God. And I saw myself in this blackness with my head down, and I was just waiting for the punishment that I knew I deserved and I thought that I was going to get immediately. And in the blackness, there appeared a speck of light. I looked at it, it jumped in my head. Jesus died for your sins. The light exploded, and I was back with my friends. And it was like the greatest sense of relief ever. And then later that night, there was more that happened that day. But so, anyways, for me, it was very clear. We're talking about Jesus here. For me, it was very clear. It wasn't like, well, this could be any God. For me, it was Jesus. But for someone else who's like, hey, I'm seeking God, the answer that I would give would be the same thing that I've given from the beginning, in the sense of, if God's a person, if that's all true, if God's a person, and we're like, hey, I'd like to know, like, is Jesus your son? Like, is Jesus the Son of God? Did he really die on the cross for my sins? Like, probably the first thing that I would do is I'd ask him. I'd say, is that true? Can you show me? And then with that, I'd probably read the Bible and probably talk to different people of different religions and seek the way that I would seek anything else. But first and foremost, I'd probably ask him, because being a person, he's able to answer. Hold on just 1 second. Maybe should we look at one of the, I mean, we could keep doing this, but I don't know if there's any questions, Anonymous, that you want to throw in.
Most of the questions we have are for people not in the room,
Okay, well, let's go ahead, Aaron.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm Muslim, right? And the biggest difference, I guess, is that us Muslims, we don't necessarily believe that Jesus is a God and that he's the Son of God. So my question is, how do we justify it?
Say that again. The biggest difference: Jesus is not the Son of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
how can we justify it, I guess?
How can a Muslim justify the position that that Jesus is the Son of God? Well, there's a lot we could talk talk about. I mean,
But like, okay, so for example, like Adam and Eve, they didn't have a mother or a father either, right?
correct.
And they were created by God.
Yeah.
So if we kind of try to follow the same logic, it would mean that they're also gods because they're sons and daughters of God.
Yeah.
Uh,
The Bible actually, at one point, says Adam, son of God, but it means it in a different sense than Jesus was the son of God. Yeah.
So Jesus is the son of God, but nowhere in the Bible he ever said that he was a god.
That Jesus didn't?
Yeah.
I'd say that he did in different ways. I mean, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Probably one of the coolest ways that he does it, and this is like one of those things you kind of have to know a little bit of Old Testament and know what's going on here to get it. Like Jesus was humble, so he didn't just walk around being like, I'm God, you know. But there were times when he really made it clear that he was God, and probably like my favorite, if I was like making a movie of the Bible, I'd probably like put this in like a sequel or something. So, I mean, you would know if you're Jewish, like you don't write God.
He's a false prophet.
Well, I mean, that's how they would see Jesus. But what I mean is like, Jews, you wouldn't write, like, a practicing Jew wouldn't write God. They would write G/D, as in like, you know. And where that comes from is this idea of like, we don't take the name of the Lord in vain. And when I say the name, especially like the name that was first revealed to Moses at the burning bush, and that name, what's interesting is, have you heard Yahweh? You heard that before? Yahweh?
No.
So Yahweh is the way that it's often pronounced today, but what's fascinating is we don't even know if that's how it's pronounced, because in the Hebrew language, there's no vowels. And so you kind of have to just guess what the vowels were. In most cases, you don't have to guess because it's like it's a spoken language. The way you say it is the way that it was said. But with Yahweh, no one said it because you don't dare speak the holy name of God. And no one said it for so long that we don't even know how it's pronounced at this point. You know. And so anyways, but what Yahweh literally means is I am. Okay? Because that's when Moses was like, so what's your name? Who am I supposed to say sent me? It comes back when Moses met God at the burning bush. It's the first time you see the name Yahweh. And it means I am. And so they wouldn't say that. The Jews wouldn't say that. And it means God. Okay? There's a couple times in the New Testament where on one occasion, the Jews were there and they're talking to the Jews that didn't agree with Jesus. And Jesus said something about Abraham, and back Abraham saw, I forget exactly what Jesus said, something about Abraham. And then they said to him, like, you're only like 20 years old or 30 years old, you don't know Abraham. And Jesus said, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. And then they picked up stones to kill him. And we read that in the English, and it's like, it's just kind of awkward. Before Abraham was, I am. Like, that's a weird way of communicating. But we understand why they wanted to kill him when he said that. It's because he said Yahweh. He said, I am. Like, in that moment, he's saying, like, I am, I am. And then there's another occasion where people are coming to arrest Jesus. They got torches and clubs and such. And he goes out to meet them. And he says to them, who do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I am he. And when he said, I am, they fell backwards. It was like, there was so much power and clarity. Like, in that, he's saying he was claiming to be the great I am. The Yahweh of the Old Testament is Jesus. Jesus is the Son of God, but he's also God. And there's a longer conversation there about what that means. But also in the book of Revelations, Jesus, I am the Alpha, the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. I mean, I'd say that he claimed to be God in lots of ways. And there's, but you're right in the sense that he didn't just step onto the scene and say, hey, everyone, I'm God. But there's other things. Even when he was saying he was the Messiah, at first, he told people to keep it secret. And there's reasons for that. But absolutely, he claimed to be God. Yeah.
So,
Good.
yeah, and I guess that's the thing that doesn't make the most sense in my head. Because is that for us, how we've always seen God was this kind of ultimate kind of entity, this kind of entity that doesn't need anything, that has always existed, that will always exist. So the moment when you say there's two gods, there's a kind of meaning of dependency, that like one will depend on the other. And this doesn't make sense because you're a God, you're an ultimate entity. Why would you depend on something else?
Right. Yeah, no, it's totally true. And this is one of the huge concepts in Judaism, and I'd say also Christianity. God is one. Like, as much as I'd say, like, there is one God, and I understand that sounds contradictory because you're like, wait a second, like, God the Father, God the Son, and we get into it now with, like, Holy Spirit is also God. We don't believe in three gods, though. This is what the doctrine, if you want to use that word, is referred to as the Trinity, is that there are three people. God has existed forever in three people. And they're one in character, one in essence. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And I mean, that's another one of those claims to be God. Like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The way it says it in Hebrews is he is in the essence God. He is the exact imprint of God's nature. But so what we believe is that, and this is what the scriptures very much seem to say, is God has forever existed in three people. God's perfection is community. God has forever existed in community, in love. He hasn't forever existed just as one person, but three people, and that's perfection.
You are preaching here about your God, which you're Protestant, right?
Yeah.
What,
The church that I'm a pastor at is non-denominational, but so I just say I'm Christian.
do you think that other than like, you talk about the people who are practicing Christianity wrong, right? People who are with hate in their hearts, but they still think that they know and accept God, right? You're not about like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, what I talked about earlier. Yeah.
Right, yeah. These people have also experienced what you've experienced.
I don't know about that.
You don't, because I talked
Or they
to them.
claim to.
Yeah, they claim to. Yeah, I mean, that was.
Do you think they're lying then, or do you think that they just don't know what they've experienced? Because how can people like you and like their beliefs are opposed? Like they are opposed. You've said different things. Yet they
Let me clarify.
the same experience.
I'm not saying that if you're in there's some like I'm not Catholic, and there's things that I would disagree with about the Catholic religion, but I'm not trying to say like all Catholics therefore are doing religion wrong. When I say there's a wrong way to do religion, I'm talking about on a heart level, and that there's this goes back to the very beginning of the Bible. Cain, you got Cain and Abel. They both went before God with their religion. Cain was rejected, and Abel was accepted. Cain was doing religion wrong. There was something in his heart. The way that he came before God was not in humility and spirit and truth. Instead, he actually felt good about himself. He's like, look what I got. He wasn't actually seeking God. And so when I say there's a wrong way to do religion, there would be people sitting next to me at church, hearing the same stuff I do, listening to my sermons, who could be doing things wrong. I'm not trying to say that it's about like having the right, teacher or something like that.
So then, in this way, what you're saying is that it's not about how you practice, but how you believe and how you approach yourself with God and your humility and accepting Him.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. Yeah.
Okay. Why is it that Jews came before you?
Right.
Jesus, He said all these things and they don't believe it, but they are still approaching. It's an Abrahamic belief. Like it's still the same God. They just don't accept the New Testament. They feel like you base your New Testament off the old one. So I guess my thing is, do you think that they are doing religion wrong by not continuing with Jesus and just saying, well, because of all of these things, we do not accept Him as the Messiah that was promised? Do you think that they would, I don't know your beliefs on hell, whether it's a true thing and eternal thing, yada yada, but like, would they go to whatever your version of like hell is, or not enter the kingdom of heaven because they're worshiping, even though they have God in their heart, it's not Jesus.
Right. Well, I'll answer this the best I can. Jesus was a Jew. The disciples were all Jews. There's been many Jews. The Apostle Paul he wasn't one of the 12, and there's been plenty of Jews who've believed in Jesus as the promised Jewish Messiah, and that's really.
But those are all within Christianity.
No, but in history, like typically what often happens is if an individual who is Jewish accepts Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, they are rejected from the Jewish community.
Because then they're not.
Correct. They were
Jewish.
the Jewish. That's right. The
what
Jewish.
Judaism is.
It's
Judaism
kind
is
of.
not accepting the New Testament, and once you accept Jesus, you are not Jewish because then you accept the New Testament.
Exactly. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, well, for one, there's a tremendous amount of. This is sad. There's a tremendous amount of pressure, where it's like, like I've met people, and it's like I hear what you're saying about Jesus, but if I believe in that, my family is going to be tremendously disappointed in me.
I'm disregarding
And,
all of the social consequences.
but like-
I'm saying on a purely theological level.
Sure, I'll come back to your question. So, do I believe that someone who does not believe that Jesus is the
They believe in Jesus, they just don't believe in God.
right? I mean, that's kind of what I said when I first started. Like, when I was a Unitarian Universalist, the single most offensive thing that someone could say is that there is one way to God and one way to heaven. And I realize today still that is perhaps the most offensive thing as a Christian I can say and believe. But yeah, I do believe, on one, I still want to just reemphasize all who seek find. So I don't care if you're Muslim, Jewish, whatever. If in your heart you want to find the truth about God and about Jesus, I believe you're going to come to the conclusion that He's the Savior of the world. I believe that, and I understand that you could probably say, I know a ton of people who don't believe that.
That's not,
You're
taking what I'm saying, putting your own things, this is not what I'm saying.
Sure.
I'm saying a true God, a loving God, who wants to help His children, who accept Him. Jews do not accept Jesus, but they accept God. It's one and the same. Now they don't accept they freeze in time. They don't accept history.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that all of these Jews who are truly, like, you can't just say that I guess you could say, all Jews do not truly want God, because if they truly wanted God, then they would be Christian. So, I mean, either all Jewish people truly don't want God, because otherwise Christ would come to them, or they're all wrong, and by your, personal view of God and His, love would be wrong and not enter heaven. It's like you can't. Both of those are not what I would expect a loving God to do and be. I guess you could just say that all Jews don't really believe or want to believe in God. But do you see what I'm saying here? It's whichever one you choose, you can't answer me with this.
Maybe. I guess the way that I understand it, when it comes to people, Jews, Gentiles, maybe you want to use that word, or non-Jews, whoever, I'm coming with it with an understanding that the way that I read the Bible and my experience in life is that people are not good. There's not a people group who deserve God's love. God holds His hand out in mercy and love to all people. And I remember, so I had this one friend growing up. this is back when I really despised Christianity, but I had this one friend growing up, and he was different from the rest of us. Because we all partied, and he didn't use drugs, and he didn't sleep around. He just didn't do the stuff that we did, but he kind of took care of us, and he'd like go to parties with us and drive, you know. And I'd stay at his house a lot. And I had conversations with my brother. I remember very specifically my brother and my friends, like, what's up with Chris's family? Because they're all kind of different, but there's something about them. Like, they had a peace. I don't know if I used those words back then, but that's what it was. They had a peace about them that made them just different. And I remember then, like, after going to college, I remember being at a cottage up north with some friends, and Chris was there. And I found out Chris was a Christian, and I was so mad. Like, I came downstairs, and I was so mad. And I remember specifically saying, "So, what do you say about the person in Africa who's never heard about Jesus? And like, what do you say about this?" Like, I was so angry. On one hand, I was angry because I was like, "Well, this makes sense. This actually explains a lot." But also, I was just angry, and I was like, "What do you say about this? What do you say about this person who doesn't have any Christians in their life? They're just going to go to hell." And what he said to me was, "Jesus will find a way." And I was so angry at that answer, because even then I was like, the logic makes sense. In the sense of, like, if he really is God, Jesus really is God, it really doesn't matter if you're born Jewish, Muslim, in the middle of Christian Bible Belt America, or in the middle of, the Sahara. It doesn't matter. If it's true that he's able to hear all who seek him, the way the Bible paints it is actually seeking God is a remarkably rare thing. Religion is common. Religion is as common as, common as the air, but actually seeking him is seemingly a pretty rare thing.
This is a very long answer for what I'm taking away, is that no, Jews do not truly want God. So
I think-
all Jews, everyone else.
I'm not saying that
That
because,
is what you're saying.
well,
You don't need to say that explicitly, but there's no other way, there's no other conclusion you can draw from that.
I'll answer it this way, which might, I do believe that everyone who hears, understands the gospel message, and continues in rejection of it, I do believe that is the result of a heart that's not open. So I guess in that way, yeah, okay, I would,
Can I follow up?
sure.
I think she's getting at the same thing that I mentioned before, where it's really like shifting the blame. For I haven't had this experience, and you're saying it's not God's fault, it's your fault, you're not actually looking. But I would argue that anybody who's already devout in any religion, really, I would argue that they are seeking, are continuously seeking, because they aren't, because they think they've already found it. But I would argue that an individual who either believes they've already found it and stopped looking, or one who is devout and feels as though they are still looking, but continuously searching for truth in their version of whatever God is, that they are being genuine in their search. And so to claim that because they haven't had this experience, that whatever their situation might be, and you couldn't know, you're going to claim that God has determined that you're not actually looking, and therefore he hasn't shown himself to you.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't, in the sense,
Sure,
like,
I understand you might not explicitly say it, but it does come off as though you're shifting the blame to the person who's searching for God. And I would argue that you would say the person who's searching for God is undergoing a noble quest, maybe, right? And so why wouldn't they expect or hope for that reward of that outstretched hand that you claimed is always there?
I would, if you might have someone who is, like, I think that I was searching for God as I was, deep into the Buddhism and Hinduism at that point. Like, I mean, when Jesus, came into my life, that was later, but I definitely say the seeking started before that. Like, I'm not going to point to someone who is a devout, Muslim or whoever and say that person's not seeking God. I don't know what's going on in their heart, but I do believe that anyone who is seeking God will find Jesus. I do believe that. But I don't know, I'm not going to say it's going to happen on this timeline or that timeline. I do understand that there's something offensive even about that.
I was wondering about the experience you described. Hypothetically, if there was someone else who had the same experience as you, but then the truth you did, to go on that they experienced to different, and then went on to live their life, like they didn't want to sin because they and functionally live their life similarly to yours, but attributed this experience to a different God.
Okay. Well, my experience, it couldn't be an identical experience because for me it was very much about, like I say, Jesus died for your sins. That was at the center of it. Okay, so my brother and I, we had lots of conversations, and he asked me a question similar to that, and he kind of believes that all religions are the same. I mean, like I say, Unitarian Universalists who grew up, that's the idea. There is something remarkably different about the way we live as Christians. It's not, like I might have something in common with someone who is, a Muslim or whatever. We have things in common in the sense like we try to be nice and don't steal, don't lie, things like that. But on a heart level, day to day, almost like minute by minute, is the sense of like, I rely on a Savior. Like I need a Savior. Like I don't have anything in myself that is of. I don't have. There's nothing good in me apart from God living in me. Like that is a very different heart posture than just trying to be a good person through religion. So I would say that there is something really different in that sense. I mean, this is part of the long conversations that I had, like with the imam recently about things that maybe it's not helpful to get into the specifics of. But sure, yeah. I don't know. I have no idea what time it is, by the way. I think I got lost right in it. So Becky, anytime we feel like it's ready to wrap up, you just come up here and.
Through that, we do have a lot of questions from Slido, so I'll just ask one to start off. I'll just ask one. Someone asked, is God necessarily an active guide, or could God be described as a passive force? So you can kind of discuss.
Passive. It was more popular like a couple hundred years ago. This idea of like deism, like I think Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were deists, and there's this idea that God like started everything, and then he just backed off and said, let's let these people figure it all out or whatever. That's not the way the Bible paints God. No, my experience, God is very much relational. He hears our prayers. He cares. He doesn't always. He very often doesn't act the way we want him to when we want him to. Sometimes he does, but he very much does act and does answer. So he's definitely not. I wouldn't call him passive by any means. So.
How do you know? How do you know he acts? How can you tell? How can you say that something happened and this was a result of God?
So I had that experience way back when, right?
That experience.
But I've had lots of experiences where I felt like God has shown himself or answered a prayer.
Can you give an example and the evidence by which you used to justify that was in fact God?
Sure. Trying to debate between which story to tell. So I'm here. I saw this email. I saw this job. I was a pastor in Wisconsin. I saw this job posting in this blog talking about looking for a pastor in Montreal. And like, I never went to seminary. I read a lot. You know, I was a church planter in Wisconsin. You know, I got a philosophy major from a secular university. I heard about this relatively large church that was looking for a pastor, and they said a word that was like a trigger word for me. They said post-Christian. We're in a post-Christian city. Post-Christian means this idea we moved on from Christianity, where we don't think that way anymore. Montreal would be considered a post-Christian city. And for me, that's like I say, that's my calling. That's when I was in like the philosophy class, I feel like that's who God has called me to speak to. And they said, we're in a post-Christian city, and I was just like, I gotta send these people an email. They're not going to respond at all. It's a big church, they probably have like 100 applicants, and they did, you know, but I've never even been to seminary, and I'm not someone, I'm this dude in Wisconsin. I sent him an email, I hit send. This is not an exaggeration. When I hit send, I did not think of it one single time until I got an email from them like 3 days before Christmas Eve saying we'd like to do a video interview with you. And I'm like, oh, I did not expect that. I go home, I didn't tell my wife. I was like, I got my teenagers there. I was like, hey, I got this email from another country. You know, I didn't even tell her when I sent the email because I didn't even think about it. It was so random, I never thought for a moment they would respond. So I'm like, I gotta talk to you something, babe. She's 4 months pregnant, by the way. We have 4 other kids. It's like, we have a life here. I'm like, babe, I gotta talk to you about something, but not right now. I gotta go up to a prayer night. I'll come back and we'll talk about it. So I go to this prayer night, right? And obviously, like, we're praying about different stuff, and in my mind, I'm like praying about this, like, this is probably a distraction I don't need in my life right now, but if you're calling me to go to Montreal, I'm very happy to go. What's going on, you know? And there's this dude, and this is like up north Wisconsin, there's this dude who's like this, like, he's a nice guy, but he's very, very, like, up north Wisconsin, Donald Trump, you know, pickup truck, you know, Harley Davidson dude. And after the prayer night's over, he comes up to me and he's talking about this and that and, you know, what the liberals are doing to our country, and like, he's just going on and on. And he'll talk forever, and I just got a lot on my mind. I was like, Fred, I don't have the energy to listen to this right now. So I'm just like zoning out, right? And he's just talking. I'm just like zoning out and thinking about this like Montreal thing. It's like, what's going on here? He's talking. And then suddenly, I'm shocked back to reality. And Fred is looking at me and he says, you hear this voice, you know? And the voice says, go to Canada, go to Canada. And there was this moment where I was like, what is going on? Why are you saying this to me? And then I realized Fred is still talking about politics. He's just speaking metaphorically, like, you look around, what's happening in our country, and you hear this voice, you know, and the voice says, go to Canada. And I was like, that was so weird. That was so weird. I'm gonna try not to read into it too much, but that was weird. It was a weird moment. And I go home, and I'm expecting my wife. I'm like nervous to tell my wife, like I say, she's 4 months pregnant. We have a life. Got an email from another country. What are your thoughts? You know, I didn't even tell her I sent this email. And I told her I got this email, and she looks at me with a tear in her eye, and she says, I could see why now would be the time the Lord would do this. And I understood what she meant by that, the things that were happening there. And then some other things went down. We're driving in the car like a week later. I'm not telling my teenagers this, obviously. Not until things are more sure. I don't want to freak them out with like, hey, we might be moving to another country. Something comes on the radio about impeachment, what was happening at the time with Donald Trump. My 14-year-old says, out of the blue, I think we should move to Canada. Like, there was some, and then, along the sort of line, those sorts of things, okay? And I understand that's just kind of like really easy to like, okay, well that just could be random stuff. So I'll just tell one more quick thing. I believe that the Holy Spirit guides us.
How do you know?
Okay. There was this time, I tell people all the time.
Before you go on to the next one, what exactly was the act of God, and how did you know in that story you just told? What was the act? How did you know?
Well, the act was me wondering the day before I even told my wife, the day I got this email, someone looking me in the eyes and says, you hear this voice, and the voice says, go to Canada. That got my attention. It didn't definitively answer the question for me. I still wasn't like, that's definitely God. But when those things start to happen, like again and again and again, it starts to build your confidence, like, all right, Lord, I think I'm starting to listen here. But there's times things that happen that even more like, this one time I told the church, like, guys, we need to be praying that God would lead us. I have this thing that I call divine appointments. Like we believe in spreading this message of the gospel, like meeting someone where God has arranged the meeting, and there I am doing just what God said. And so I'm like, pray for divine appointments. And I remember like, man, I told the whole church to do this. I should probably do it also. And I'm down by the river walking, and I'm like, God, lead me to talk to who you want me to talk to. And this dude rides by on a bike going the opposite direction of me. And something jumped in my heart that was like, that's the guy to talk to. That was very strong. And I was like, I'm not going to chase him down, But it very much felt it. And I was like, okay. And so I'm just watching him bike away. And then he stops. He stops in this trail and he starts picking something off the tree and like eating it. And I was like, I don't know what that is. It's not a fruit tree. I don't know what he's doing. So I kind of walked quickly, and I caught up with him. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, this is I forget what it's called. It's going to come around later. But he says it's a type of tree. You can kind of eat this berry. I was like, interesting. We talked about foraging, and we talked about this or that. And I'm thinking, this is weird that I'm talking to this dude, because I really thought God wanted me to talk to him. But I'm like nervous. I'm not going to be like, so I wasn't like, so what do you think about Jesus? We're just talking about like foraging, And then, like, after talking for a while and me feeling really uncomfortable, I see this little, like, tattoo on his arm. I'm like, that's Hebrew. And so I'm like, hey, what's the tattoo mean? And he's like, it means shalom. I'm like, that's a word that's really important. I mean, my daughter, Tobiah, that's her middle name, is shalom. It's a very important word in my life. It means wholeness. This dude grew up, let me just finish, almost done. This dude grew up in like a Christian family at some point, but he left because he was just unconvinced. And what was he doing now? He was going to the Unitarian Universalist Church, where I grew up. And we had this long conversation. He was at church the next Sunday. He got baptized like a month later. To this day, him and his family, it's like, they're following the Lord. Now, you're not going to convince me. I've had this conversation about Jesus with so many people, and 99.99% of them do not raise their hand and say, yes, I want to follow Jesus. But the day that I say, Lord, give me a divine appointment, and I hear a voice that says, that's the guy, and then he's biking away and he happens to stop, I see the tattoo, he's going to the church I grew up at so I can talk to him about Unitarian Universalism, and then to this day, he's living as a Christian. Like, you're not going to just tell me those are just a bunch of coincidences, one after the other. Like, I experienced the Holy Spirit in my life,
So, I'll relent and say maybe they're not a bunch of coincidences. I'll also say that shalom doesn't mean wholeness. It's Hebrew for peace or hello.
Wholeness, peace, wholeness. It means more, yeah.
And I would say that, okay, so let's say that it wasn't just a set of coincidences. What about that proves that it was God? How do you know for a fact that it was God? What is your standard of evidence that suggests that it was God and not some other set of circumstances?
To me, it seems quite obvious. If I pray, God, show me who to talk to, and then I get a sense of it's that person, and then the circumstances allow themselves, and to me, I feel like if that's not enough to show me that it's God, then what would be enough?
It's a good question. I think that's actually why a lot of us have come here, to find out what would convince us to believe. And I ask, what is a valid standard of truth? What is a reliable pathway to truth? And I'm asked, so for you, what is a reliable pathway to truth? Is it simply the faith that you have?
No, I'm actually glad you asked this. And Becky, just come up here when you feel like time's up, because I'm in like a time hole, and so. Or if anyone just needs to go somewhere, you can go. I mean, I'm not going to be offended. This is something. And by the way, I'd love to do this again sometime, because we'll do this again. Watch the relevant page or whatever. Okay, so I had that experience that I told you about before, where I was like, understood I was like a sinner, like Jesus died for your sins. A week later, I was doubting the whole thing. I wasn't really doubting it. I mean, I knew it happened, but I was still troubled by this, like, well, what about every other religion? I still had like doubts about like full-blown Christianity, And so like, it's funny because I had this like boss at the bagel shop that I worked at, and I knew she was a Christian. She was like the only Christian I knew in this town. And I didn't tell her what happened to me, but I said something happened about Jesus. And it's really hard for me to believe that there's only one true religion. And I wanted a philosophical answer from her. I wanted her to explain to me why it was logical for Christianity to be the only truth. She wasn't that type of person. She was just not really a cerebral person. And she was like, oh, is that what your question is? Well, just pray about it, And at the time, I was just like, you know what? That's a good idea. Because for like a week, I was trying to figure this out like it was a puzzle. Like, if I can really figure it out, then I can understand what sort of religion is truth. But what she was telling me is kind of what I've been trying to say in the beginning. Like, God's a person, and if you're wondering, like, you should ask him. And so, this is what I prayed. I remember it. I prayed, Jesus, if you're real, prove yourself to me. This was 1 week after experiencing the darkness of God's judgment and hearing the voice, Jesus died for your sins. This is 1 week after that. I'm praying, Jesus, if you're real, prove yourself to me. What that tells you is we're a stubborn lot. As in like, when you read the Bible, you see this. Like, people experience the glory of God, and then then they run out of food, and they're like, we're all going to die. And God gives them food. And then they're like, wow. And then they run out of water the next day, and they're like, we're going to die. There's no hope. And anyway, so I was just like asking God to prove himself to me a week after. I've been a Christian now for a long time. I've never heard anyone tell me how the gospel message was showed to them in the way that it was showed to me a week prior. But here I was asking God to prove himself to me. So I prayed, prove yourself to me. And nothing really happened the next day. But I did get to think about it. And I was like, you know what? I could go my whole life trying to figure this out, but maybe I've already seen enough. So I made a decision. I talked about this on Christmas Eve. The philosopher Kierkegaard would call this the leap of faith, where there's a point in which, even if you have the evidence, which I had, you still have to make a decision to trust and jump off that cliff of faith. And what's crazy was I was walking out of work, and that was the moment. I remember the specific moment where I said, I'm going to stop doubting, and I'm going to believe, and I'm going to not look back. I settled in my heart. And within a quarter of a second, I looked up, and a distance from me to you, someone had set up a table. And on the table was a sign that said, Campus Crusade for Christ. This was like, I'm going to believe in Jesus, I'm not going to look back. Boom. And I walked up to them, I'm like, do you guys have a Bible I could have? And I was like, by the way, Campus Crusade for Christ in Canada is called Power to Change. It's what we're at right now. But it's like, so this is like instantaneous after making a decision. All that to say is evidence, all the evidence in the world wasn't enough to make me a Christian. I still needed to say, all right, God, I'm going to trust you. I don't know if it answers the question. At least response to the question. So.
Actually, one more slide question.
Sure.
Okay, someone asked,
That's a good question. The traditions, is the way I'd answer it. The traditions don't make you a Christian, and the traditions don't keep you as a Christian. But the traditions might be really helpful for you. They might be really helpful. There's sometimes those traditions have been happening for thousands of years for good reason. Sometimes there's really good value. Sometimes those traditions are actually rooted in the Bible, and so there's really good value in that. But I think the foundation, I'm not a heavily traditional person myself. I think like kind of the foundation of this relationship we have with God is just that. It's a relationship. I have a relationship with my wife. It would be good for me to occasionally buy her flowers and bring her out to dinner. Those things could be really helpful for our relationship, but our relationship isn't built on that. And, I don't know if that answers the question. Sure. Yeah.
What were some of the arguments that you used on those occasions when you went to the Bible study groups to question the Christians?
All sorts of stuff. I mean, you guys just use this as a crutch because you're afraid of dying. What about all the other religions out there? On one occasion, I made some stuff up and I said it's just a chemical thing in your brain that scientists proved. Maybe scientists say that, but at the time I just lied, and I don't feel really bad about that actually. But I said all sorts of stuff.
So a follow-up to that is, how would you now, as a Christian, answer those questions that you asked?
I feel like a lot of them probably came out in the last couple hours or so. But yeah, it depends on which one. I mean, the first thing I'd say is I understand where you're coming from. If you feel that really strongly, I understand.
Which question?
Well, lots of them. The idea that Christians only do this because they're afraid of dying. It's just a crutch. That's something I used to say and think. Christians are just not really motivated by. There's some of the stuff that I didn't like about Christians, I still don't. And this
Christianity?
Yeah, that's what I mean. And well, Christians, Christian culture. I saw that Christianity was just hugely political, where to me it felt like what you're really doing is just fighting political fights like everyone else, and you kind of use your religion to kind of justify what feels just like, it's like you don't really care about Jesus, you just want to win politically. You just want, I don't know if it's the same deal in Canada as there is in the US with like the culture wars and Republicans and Democrats, but I remember just being just sickened by what I saw of like religious hypocrisy with the Republican Party and such, and I still am, much of it. Like when Christians celebrate Donald Trump, to me that's sick. That's like idolatry. That's like, there's nothing at all even a little Christian about this man. And like, to me, I see that and I say, you guys, that's not motivated by love of God, that's just about winning. And that sort of stuff I saw as hypocrisy, and I still do. And I hate it.
We'll finish off there, but we still have 2 more nights of relevant and lots of chances to ask discussion questions. Probably just going to come back, as you said. I want to reiterate, because I know we had talked about the whole seeking God thing, and it's not necessarily you seek God the first time you pray, God's boom, although that doesn't all happen sometimes. It's even more a process. You're saying
Absolutely.
years.
The first time that I said, first time that I ever prayed, Jesus, if you're real, come into my life, that was a year and a half before I had that experience. But what did happen was suddenly there was a couple of Christians that moved down the hall from me who I became friends with, even though I argued with them all the time. And that dude prayed for me so much. He prayed for me all the time. And that's another story for another time. But yeah, a lot happened after that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I hope to do this again. If you guys are available in February, I'm happy to take time.
Thank you, Pastor Charlie, for your talk, your answers, and insight. And thank you everyone for coming out to our evening talk. Check out our schedule for the remaining talks throughout the week. Tomorrow, our 1 p.m. lunch talk is on the topic of why I am a person of faith. Come join us at the AUS Lounge in the basement of Lake. Furthermore, if you would like to chat some more, after a 5-minute intermission, we will be having a postdoc session until 9 p.m. with some staff and students to continue the discussion. Everyone is welcome to stay if they want to ask more questions or continue the discussion. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we wish you a safe night.
I'll take any comment first. If you need a pen, you got a pen.
Should I stop?
Yeah, you can.